Thank you so much. And I'm happy to be with you again. And thank you, Lauren, for the invitation. And it's interesting in the comments that have just been made already why we would be interested in something like this, why we need religion. One would almost think that that's a rather silly question because we know that, of course, we need religion. And maybe that does hark back to what we were talking about earlier, and that is Adventism originally and Adventism today. It does seem a relevant question today, but 150 years ago, I think it would have been a silly question. Okay, that said, let me go on and progress in my presentation to you. And for me I've got my first screen here in order to go to my next slide. What do I do?
You could just click your mouse. That usually does it. Click your pad.
Okay, just on the screen itself. Okay, that's
no.
You're at the bottom. I can. There we go.
Oh, you have that. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. So why do we need religion? And here I'm giving you sort of a summary of where I'm coming from, so you won't be surprised. And I've got about 15, 16 slides, and it should be. Cherry Ann, maybe you could let me know, and then I didn't bring my watch with me when we're 30 minutes, so I know I only have 5 or 10 minutes.
You can go as long as you have information for. Just keep going. Just go. Don't go over an hour.
Oh no. I like dialogue. You know, I'm not the guy with the answers. I've got questions, more questions than answers. But here's where I'm suggesting we'll be going, and that is the idea that as human beings, we need a purpose for which to live. I think this is a widely accepted generic statement. It's not particularly religious. But religion, I argue, addresses this widespread existential need that human beings have more adequately than any other discipline or dimension of our civilized lives. So that's the first point. And the second point would be that religion functions primarily at the affective level of our existence. That's going to be the major thrust of the arguments that I'll be giving you. And further than that, I suggest that is where we human beings really live. If we think deeply about this question and we're really honest with ourselves. And I think this will come as maybe an eye-opener to some of us here, but maybe not many. But I don't, because I think in our tradition, our Adventist tradition, we're sort of obsessed with the idea of truth. At the intellectual level, not at the affective level. Then the third point would be that religion's content may sometimes be even fuzzy. And here I've got to change my screen so I can see all my slide here. There we go. Okay, that religion's content may be fuzzy and even wrong. But my point, and it's related to what I was just saying, is that this is secondary to the importance of religion. You know, the fact that some of our ideas might be wrong. Religion's essential role is beyond mere factual content, but still factual content is vital. So I'm wanting to make a distinction there, not not a separation. Let's go on, and I want to acknowledge that my primary book behind this presentation is called Why We Need Religion by a philosopher, Stephen Asma, and I've got a picture of it there, and here's my own copy, which doesn't look quite so neat. But Stephen Asma is a philosopher in Chicago. He is at a college there. He's published with university presses, mainly Oxford. That's where this book comes from, but also Harvard and Chicago, written for the New York Times. But he's a significant thinker and can write well and thinks deeply about these things. And he has been transformed from sort of a mainline academic where religion is a no-no to an enthusiastic, not just advocate for, but participant in religion. He spent time in Cambodia and was very impressed by the importance of religion for life in the East. And he converted some time ago to Buddhism. And he's written a book on, I think it's called Why I'm a Buddhist. I think that it's no news to you folk that religion is on hard times today. E.O. Wilson, the Harvard etymologist, he has said that for the sake of human progress, the best thing, and here I need to change my slide, what's here so I can read my own slides. Oops, okay, just a minute. Okay, I can't easily see that. For the sake of human progress, the best thing, something that possibly could happen would be for us to diminish to the point of eliminating religious faiths. And we all have written on how the nuns, the category of the nuns in polls that are taken across the world, particularly in this country, show that they are escalating. That's the people who identify as non-affiliated in terms of a religion. Now it's 3 in 10. 10 years ago, it was 2 in 10. It does seem like it's, I was just looking at some polls, it's stabilizing a bit, but we are not the religious country that we used to be. I think we're all familiar with the 4 horsemen. One has died, but Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, brilliant thinker, Dennett, Harris, and Dawkins. But when I've seen discussions that these men have had about religion and with religionists, I'm impressed over and over how they, reference was made by one of you to low-lying fruit. They take fundamentalism and show all kinds of problems with that. They don't take the most sophisticated adherents and proponents of religion, because that's much more difficult. And that's going to be the sort of religion that I'm going to be suggesting here today for your consideration. Stephen Asma, as I've already indicated, is an unlikely rescuer of religion because of his his background as being a mainline philosophical academic who dismisses religion as just an empty myth that educated people get beyond. His approach to his significant book, and this was a book that my own Sabbath school class at Loma Linda went through chapter by chapter about 4 years ago. It's rooted in neuroscience. I mean, he's a very well-read guy, and he sees the brain as a union of three complementary operating systems. He sees that at the most basic level, and one that we share with most creatures on Earth, is the reptilian brain, where we have this at a very deep level of our brains, the idea of fight or flight when there is danger, a basic instinct. And if you reflect like I do on why I will flinch and make actions in emergency situations, and then I reflect on it, I say, hey, I never thought about doing that. And you realize that you have taken an action without cerebral thought. It's deep brain work. Okay, that's that ancient reptilian brain. And then comes the mammalian, or the limbic brain. That's where our emotions lie. And that's going to be the primary focus in what we're going to be talking about here. And then the most recently developed part of our brain is the neocortex, where the sort of reasoning that goes on that we're doing here today. And so it's not one or the other. I think that here at the bottom, we're suggesting this, that the ideal person appreciates, integrates all three of these levels. But as I was saying earlier, it's particularly the discipline of religion that has direct access. This is the point that Asma makes, that religion has direct access to our emotions in a way that philosophy or science or any of the disciplines, psychology, it doesn't have. Okay. Asma's point, and this might seem derogatory to you. It sort of seems derogatory to me to say that religion should be seen as therapy. It helps us cope with existence. He describes the therapeutic value of religion in taking various avenues. And he particularly focuses on forgiveness, the notion of forgiveness. Human beings do bad things. Religion addresses our feelings about those bad things and has concepts of forgiveness. Liturgies. We have various liturgies that go beyond the neocortex and involve our whole beings in worship. The notion of sacrifices is big in religion. The offering of salvation and concepts of salvation, these are all what he would see as survival resources, successful survival resources. Now, the older brain, he says, is built for survival, not based on rationality. I was just referring to that, and it's not bad, but it's good, but it's not the whole story. And he extols emotions such as fear love, rage, and indeed hope as essential for that early mammal's flourishing and our own. He has a lot of questions about religion's ability to reach the, as he puts it, the bar of rational validity. But then he adds, interestingly, but he says, we're at the wrong bar when we're asking those sort of questions about religion, because he says that's really not what essentially religion is about. So in developing the notion of our being at the wrong bar when we ask these questions of rational validity, he points to those new atheists. I was just mentioning them, and he criticizes them for only seeing religion in terms of its content. It's only a neocortical level exercise that these atheists engage in when they're looking at religion. As I was mentioning, that used to be where Stephen Asma is, and he's I looked him up on Wikipedia. He is, I'd say, in his early 60s, late 50s, as a senior thinker. And he himself was, as he puts it, strenuously critical of religion back in the 90s. And he was regularly writing articles for the Skeptical Inquirer, Humanist magazine, and Skeptic magazine. But in Why We Need Religion, in this book that I'm holding up before you, he affectionately refers to his, this is in his acknowledgments, and I took real note of this. In his acknowledgments, the first page of the book, he refers to his parents who began his life. And he said, and God's willing, they will make it all the way to the end with me. And then at the end of that first page, he dedicates the book to his son, Julian. And he says, when it's all done, I will meet you on the far side. Hugs and kisses, hugs and kisses. That doesn't sound like this detached philosopher, does it? Okay. Okay, let's go back to that basic question of just what is the religion that he's talking about. Well, he refers to the Christian philosopher Charles Taylor. He's up in Canada. It's written a big tome on called Secularism, and he says that Taylor suggests that religion is a framework that gives us values. And in that vein, Asma says, Western secular liberalism is a religion that doesn't know it's a religion. Well, what do you think about that? Do you think that you know, the agenda of the Democratic Party in the United States is a religion? At least for some people, or not? Well, Asma says no. He advances a framework that includes the transcendent. It's not just secular liberalism. And he says it's a framework from which our values come. Religion, he says, is intimately metaphysical and often tends toward the supernatural. The values and the meanings flow from the metaphysics. The belief in a God, or a soul, or karma, or the afterlife makes up the foundational content that anchors the values. That I find that quite very significant, and this great philosopher, well, I think he's quite significant. He doesn't recognize the fact that it seems to me, being a little contradictory in putting so much weight on the affective and not recognizing that he himself doesn't see those emotions that are so important to religion as free floating, but they do have a basis in metaphysics from which they flow. I myself applaud that move because it makes for a more sound, holistic view of the human being. And I don't think Asma, if he were here with us, he would disagree with that. He would say, "Oh, you're right. You caught me. I didn't formally recognize that as I should have. I sort of slipped it in." And I think if he were here with us and we said, "Well, which is more basic a concept? Which one of these four that you mentioned, God, soul, karma, or afterlife?" Here, I got that on the next slide. Which do you think is more basic? I think that he would reason with us and he would say, "Yep, I think you're right. God is the more basic, because afterlife, that has to do with a transcendent dimension. And if it's not God that provides an afterlife, it's something else. Karma would be something significant that is similar. And that would be something that he believes in as a Buddhist. And then soul, this immaterial essence. But finally, it would be God that I believe we would come to acknowledge as being the overriding transcendent concept, the belief in a supreme or ultimate reality. And it seems that if you're going to believe in karma, afterlife, or soul, you are also believing in an ultimate reality that is beyond what is in the academy today, and that is just materialism, something beyond. So let's run with the notion of God. And here I'm drawing from a figure that in my study at the seminary at Andrews and in my doctoral work at Claremont has been very big in my thinking. And incidentally, my basic theological, ethical trajectory in my life was formed when I was at the seminary at Andrews back in the late 50s. Studying with figures like my late colleague at Loma Linda, Will Alexander, Godfrey Dusterval, who's retired there at Andrews, Harold Weiss, also still retired, is retired now there at Andrews, Roy Branson, but Sakai Kubo. But these people are the ones who gave me my basic trajectory. And then when I went to Claremont, it just sort of filled in the pieces. And I find that quite significant. And I've got the 3-volume set of Paul Tillich's systematic theology, and I just yesterday was reviewing some of that. And what a deep thinker. And he defines God as the ground of being itself. I like that. He criticized those who see God as merely a being among beings, and that's part of the problem with fundamentalist religion, is that God is just another one of us, of the players. But and one can point out all kinds of conceptual problems with that view of God, but with Paul Tillich's notion of God being the ground of being itself, it puts God on a much more foundational level, I would suggest. And the first point I would make is that to confess that belief in God as the ultimate reality, that is a huge, huge commitment for a person to make today, because in this Western world in which we live, secular humanism is so entrenched. It's just the coin of academia in all disciplines and in too many schools of theology, I would suggest. It's a time when materialism is the default explanation of all. There is not a confession of belief in an ultimate reality that's beyond the reductionist science. And I think that's short-sighted. And I wonder if its time will may be limited, and we'll get back to the great thinkers of medieval and early Christian Western times. But that's not on the horizon right away. Now, I started this little talk by suggesting that Adventists are not, are different today than we were back at our origins, but and I think that is shown in the series of sermons that Randy Roberts gave at the University Church at Loma Linda just in August and September at camp meeting. And I don't think he would have chosen to speak on this topic if he didn't sense there may be a general need in the congregation. But the topic was to believe or not to believe. That is the question. And the first sermon was pretty basic. God, question mark, exclamation point. You can't be serious, exclamation point. And Randy, as he usually does, he really did his homework, and it was an excellent sermon on something so basic as the plausibility of belief in God today. And then went on to talk about other big questions like, Lauren, you mentioned organized religion. He took on, one sermon was on organized religion and the benefits, the challenges that are there. On suffering, the question of theodicy, good God, pain in this world. So those sort of themes. So I think that this basic question of the role of religion, of God, is not irrelevant for us today. But rather than, as is sometimes seen, well, routinely seen in fundamentalist thought, including the great majority of Adventists, it's either you go with science or you go with God. I suggest this is a false dilemma, that the two are complementary. We mentioned Richard Dawkins. He wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. It's on Darwinian evolution. That's the answer. He says, in setting up the answer of Darwin, he says, at the molecular genetic level, every single one of the more than, here I can't read that, trillions of cells in the body contain about 1,000 times as much precisely coded digital information as my entire computer. The complexity of living organisms is matched by the elegant efficiency of their apparent design. If anyone doesn't agree that this amount of complex design cries out for an explanation, I give up. And then it is Charles Darwin to the rescue as he provides the scientific explanation that Dawkins says puts to rest any sort of questions. But fellow philosopher of a very different orientation, Richard Swinburne, he says to Dawkins, I want a further explanation than just Darwin. He says, science explains, Richard, Swinburne, postulate a God to explain why science explains. This isn't to be a discussion of just this, but at some point, Lauren, you may want to have a session where you do talk about the complementary nature of science and religion. I mean, science has to do with questions of what and how, how things work. When it comes to the big questions of existence, questions of why and who, that's where theology, where religion comes in. That's where Genesis 1 and 2 continue to be informative for a progressive Adventist thinker who rejects them as a literal how-to description of the way God did it, to be able to say, hey, it's not talking about how it happened, it's talking about who did it, who is responsible, why God created life to begin with. But that gets us going in another direction than we're going today. And Cherry Ann, what are we doing for time? How much more time do I have?
Jim, you can just keep going, and when you're through, we'll have the discussion. We don't want you to rush.
Okay. Well, but I don't want to get sidetracked. Okay. Let me continue to build my argument for the plausibility of religion today. I'll turn to the Harvard philosopher William James, who defends the option to believe. I've got a little book called On the Courage to Believe. This includes this essay that is a popular lecture that he gave to the philosophy club students at Brown and Yale universities back in 1896. William James being at Harvard, and he said to the students in preparation for that talk, just so that you Yale and Brown students know, at Harvard we still talk about God and these sort of things. And he said, I'm not going to be talking to you, it's going to sound like a sermon, but it's really not. I'm not going to talk to you about justification by faith, but I'm going to be talking to you about justification of faith. And his talk, which has been transcribed, of course, the will to believe is justly famous. And that's what I'm drawing on here. He sets it up this way, that thesis that's the bottom of the screen. He first of all says there are some decisions that we human beings have to make that are very important. There are many little things that really don't matter, but there are some questions, such as the question of God, is one of these important questions. Number one, it's a living question. It's not dead. It's not something in the past that has been settled or is irrelevant for us today. No, it's a live question today. Secondly, he says it's a forced question. You really can't avoid it if you're thinking about life deeply today and you're concerned about large issues. It's forced. You've got to say yes or no. You can't just be on the fence. And by being on the fence, you've actually made a decision. And then third is that it's momentous. It's not trivial. It's a very big question, whether God is going to be a part of your mental life or not. So that's how he sets it up. And then he gives this thesis, and in the publication of this essay from the very beginning, he's put this in italics. The thesis I defend is briefly stated this. Two times the word passional is used because he, like asthma that we're talking about, sees that we really live at a deeper level than just the neocortex. Note that. He says, our passional nature is not only lawfully may, but must decide an option between propositions whenever it is a genuine option that cannot by its nature be decided on intellectual grounds. For to say, under such circumstances, do not decide, but leave the question open, is itself a passional decision, just like deciding yes or no, and is attended with the same risk of losing the truth. So, you might want to come back to that, but it's very significant that he sees that this is not just a question of the neocortex. It's a deeply religious question, and here, as I've alluded to, Asma and James agree, and beyond that, they point out that the skeptic unknowingly has her own emotional basis for thinking. James writes that he who says, better go without belief forever than believe a lie, merely shows his own preponderant private horror of becoming a dupe. He may be critical of many of his desires and fears, but this fear he slavishly obeys. And then Asma sort of puts in his own words, I think, what James has just said. He adds, after he quotes James in this book I have here, the skeptic fears, quote, more than anything, the possibility of being fooled, and he gambles that he would rather be inconsolable and suffer the pains of doubt than become a boob. This withholding of belief is insurance against the final discovery that there is no God after all. The skeptic is afraid of humiliation, whereas the believer is ready to risk such humiliation. And I don't think any of us, even those who are more conservative among us here in this group, thinks that a decision for God is something that is fail proof. It's not a slam dunk intellectually. There is risk involved. And then I want to go to a third book that I've got here called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, written by a psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. And in this book, he's making a similar point to what these two gentlemen I've just referred to make, and that is that that we really live at this deeper level of our being, that fight flight level, but then particularly the level which our emotions reside, and not primarily at the neocortical level. He says the first principle of moral psychology is this: intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. And have you ever thought about why these well-educated Supreme Court justices that we have in this country, why they will take diametrically opposing positions on certain issues? I don't think it's that some of them have higher IQs than others, or they go to better Ivy League schools. But they, at a deeper level of their being, that affective level, they have different senses of what the Constitution says or should say in our society. Their intuitions are different. That's how Haidt would put it. Social and political judgments depend heavily, he says, on quick, intuitive flashes. We have a sense of what is right, and then the neocortex kicks in and gives supporting reasons for what we think at a deeper level of our visceral beings. And so one of the most significant chapters in this, what is this, about a 400, 500-page book is Elephant's Rule, in which the basic message is that the writer just thinks that he's in control. And you can get the picture. He talks about this big lumbering elephant that has this little rider who's strapped on top of that huge beast, and the rider thinks that he's actually guiding where that elephant goes. But if that elephant has in his being the desire to go left or right, that rider just thinks that he's controlling. It's really the elephant who is in charge. And the elephant is the emotional self. The rider is the neocortex in this chapter, Elephant's Rule. Okay, let me bring things to a close here. I find that in my own religious life, that as important as cerebral thinking is, that that is highly complemented by the more affective part of my being. Back about 10, 12 years ago now, my wife was singing at the local United Church of Christ congregation in the choir, and I would often go to worship with her and hear her sing. And I forget what it was, but it was one of the, thank God, rather infrequent low times in my life. And I was sitting there in the congregation, and the Christian hymn, which I've never heard in an Adventist church, but it was quite often sung at this congregational church, is On Eagle's Wings. And as this was being sung, as I was singing it, it went beyond my neocortex and went to my soul, and I just had a prolonged sense of well-being as these words seeped into my soul. Just two stanzas, the second one being one that was repeated. It's the refrain. And it's based on Psalm 91, one of my favorite Psalms, perhaps yours. You who dwell in the shelter of the Lord, who abide in his shadow for life, say to the Lord, my refuge, my rock in whom I trust. And he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. It's even more powerful when it's sung, and we could go to YouTube and hear it sung, but I'm not sure that we have time.
Yeah, I can do that for you. I queued it up when you asked me to.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Well, let's put that on. I think it would be here, and it would give us that. And with music, that this further addresses our emotional being and not just the neocortical. Okay. So that's what I wanted to do. That was from me, and now Asma, he refers to this Jewish philosopher Jean Hazes, who reflects on her extended family celebration of the Seder. Cedar. And let me, before I quote this, let me just mention that Larry Garrity, for instance, an eminent Adventist archaeologist who has studied with Siegfried Horn, he points out, as does Doug Brown and other archaeologists, that the Old Testament stories of Israel follow the paradigm of the times, and that is ancient peoples, Semitic peoples, largely constructing the story of their forebears in order to get a sense of themselves, as opposed to that being strictly literal. It's anchored on historical figures, but they're embellished. And so that's the background that she knows as she says what she does here. She says, when she goes to her family's extended family celebration of Seder, she says, I like pretending the Passover story is, we would say, literally true. And she explains, because of the continuity that it creates. It ties me to the other people at the table. I like feeling tied to Jews over the centuries and across the world. I also like the themes of liberation and freedom that can be tied to the basic story. And let me conclude by suggesting 3 takeaways and then a couple of questions. What does all of this sort of reasoning mean for me personally? What might it mean for you? But first of all, I would suggest that as a progressive Adventist, that understanding the importance of this emotional level of our being helps me to have a broader and deeper basis for even redoubling my efforts to be more affirming of my more conservative brothers and sisters in the faith. It's a continual project for me to have a high esteem for those who I think are in some regards so conceptually wrong-headed. But if I can keep in mind that religion is not just about ideas, and if you think of it, our best ideas in the hereafter, we're going to reflect back on and see how inadequate they have been. So why fight over ideas? Why not put my arms around my brother and sister who has a different idea than me and say, hey, at a deeper level, we both are very indebted to our religious tradition for the meaning it gives to our lives. And as an Adventist pastor, I have even further reason to be ecumenical in my Christian involvement. And when I was pastor of the Adventist church here in Claremont, which I still live, I was head of the pastoral association for a year and took a very active role in inviting others to come to our congregation, to our church, for ecumenical meetings. And that's because we hold so much more in common with other Christians than separate us. And as a broad-minded Adventist, I can see the inadequacies of my own tradition, are being so tied to a literalist understanding of the scriptures and reality generally, rather than seeing, and then I can go to other churches like the Episcopal Church that I went to when my colleague who I was going to graduate school with was a lay priest at the St. Ambrose, and going to church there and getting so involved in the liturgy, the richness of that liturgy, what was said congregationally in responsive readings, up and down in prayers, the short homily, the whole thing. When I came away, I thought, even if one had intellectual doubts, the richness of the service would carry me on. Couple of questions. What does our Adventist history of scriptural literalism say about how difficult or easy it may be to appreciate the affective dimension of religion? And then secondly, how do you feel about the fact that feeling may precede thinking? Or should I ask, what do you think about feeling preceding thinking and decision making? And does it make a difference how this question of precedence is phrased?